Chapter 4: When Only the Best Will Do. Choosing wisely begins with developing a clear understanding of your goals, and the first choice you must make is between the goal of choosing the absolute best and the goal of choosing something that is good enough. If you seek and accept only the best, you are a maximizer. Imagine going shopping for a sweater. You go to a couple of department stores or boutiques, and after an hour or so, you find a sweater that you like. The color is striking, the fit is flattering, and the wool feels soft against your skin. The sweater costs $89. You're all set to take it to the salesperson when you think about the store down the street that has a reputation for low prices. You take the sweater back to its display table, hide it under a pile of other sweaters of a different size so that no one will buy it out from under you and leave to check out the other store. Maximizers need to be assured that every purchase or decision was the best that could be made. Yet, how can anyone truly know that any given option is absolutely the best possible? The only way to know is to check out all the alternatives. A maximizer can't be certain that she has found the best sweater unless she looked at all the sweaters. She can know that she is getting the best price unless she's checked out all the prices. As a decision strategy, maximizing creates a daunting task, which becomes all the more daunting as the number of options increases. The alternative to maximizing is to be a satisficer. To satisfy is to settle for something that is good enough and not worry about the possibility that there might be something better. A satisficer has criteria and standards. She searches until she finds an item that meets those standards, and at that point she stops. As soon as she finds a sweater that meets her standard of fit, quality, and price in the very first store she enters, she buys it. End of story. She is not concerned about better sweaters or better bargains just around the corner. Of course, no one is an absolute maximizer. Truly checking out all the sweaters in all the stores would mean that buying a single sweater could take a lifetime. The key point is that maximizers aspire to achieve that goal. Thus, they spend a great deal of time and effort on the search, reading labels, checking out consumer magazines, and trying new products. Worse, after making a selection, they are nagged by the options they haven't had time to investigate. In the end, they are likely to get less satisfaction out of the exquisite choices they make than will satisfiers. When reality requires maximizers to compromise, to end a search and decide on something, apprehension about what might have been takes over. To a maximizer, satisfiers appear to be willing to settle for mediocrity, but that is not the case. A satisfier may be just as discriminating as a maximizer. The difference between the two types is that the satisfier is content with the merely excellent as opposed to the absolute best. I believe that the goal of maximizing is a source of great dissatisfaction, that it can make people miserable, especially in a world that insists on providing an overwhelming number of choices, both trivial and not so trivial. When Nobel Prize winning economist and psychologist Herbert Simon initially introduced the idea of satisficing in the 1950s, he suggested that when all the costs in time, money, and anguish involved in getting information about all the options are factored in, satisficing is in fact the maximizing strategy. In other words, the best people can do all the things considered is to satisfy. The perceptiveness of Simon's observation is at the heart of many of the strategies I will offer for fighting back against the tyranny of overwhelming choices. Distinguishing maximizers from satisfiers. We all know people who do their choosing quickly and decisively, and people for whom almost every decision is a major project. A few years ago, several colleagues and I attempted to develop a set of questions that will diagnose people's propensity to maximize or satisfy. We came up with a 13-item survey. We asked those taking the survey whether they agreed with each item. The more they agreed, the more they were maximizers. Try it for yourself. Write a number from 1 completely disagree to 7 completely agree next to each question. Now add up these 13 numbers. Your score can range from a low of 13 to a high of 91. If your total is 65 or higher, you're clearly on the maximizing end of the scale. If your score is 40 or lower, you are on the satisfying end of the scale. We gave this survey to several thousand people. The high score was 75, the low 25, and the average about 50. Perhaps surprisingly, there were no differences between men and women. Let's go through the items on the scale, imagining what a maximizer would say to himself as he answered the questions. Maximization scale. 1. Whenever I'm faced with a choice, I try to imagine what all the other possibilities are, even ones that aren't present at the moment. 2. No matter how satisfied I am with my job, it's only right for me to be on the lookout for better opportunities. 3. When I am in the car listening to the radio, I often check other stations to see if something better is playing, even if I'm already relatively satisfied with what I'm listening to. 4. When I watch TV, I channel surf, often scanning through the available options even while attempting to watch one program. 5. I treat relationships like clothing. I expect to try a lot on before finding the perfect fit. 6. I often find it difficult to shop for a gift for a friend. 7. Renting videos is really difficult. I'm always struggling to pick the best one. 8. When shopping, I have a hard time finding clothing that I really love. 10. I'm a big fan of lists that attempt to rank things: the best movies, the best singers, the best athletes, the best novels, etc. 11. I find that writing is very difficult, even if it's just writing a letter to a friend, because it's so hard to word things just right. I often do several drafts of even simple things. 12. No matter what I do, I have the highest standards for myself. 13. I never settle for second best. 14. I often fantasize about living in ways that are quite different from my actual life. So 1. Whenever I'm faced with the choice, I try to imagine what all the other possibilities are, even ones that aren't present at the moment. The maximizer would agree. How can you tell you have the best without considering all the alternatives? What about the sweaters that might be available in the other stores? The second one, no matter how satisfied I am with my job, it's only right for me to be on the lookout for better opportunities. A good job is probably not the best job. A maximizer is always concerned that there is something better out there and acts accordingly. When I'm in the car listening to the radio, I often check other stations to see if something better is playing, even if I am relatively satisfied with what I'm listening to. Yes, the maximizer likes this song, but the idea is to get to listen to the best song, not to settle for one that is good enough. 4. When I watch TV, I channel surf, often scanning through the available options even while attempting to watch one program. Again, a maximizer seeks not just a good TV show, but the best one. With all these stations available, there might be a better show on somewhere. 5. I treat relationships like clothing. I expect to try a lot on before finding the perfect fit. For maximizer, somewhere out there is the perfect lover, the perfect friend. Even though there is nothing wrong with your current relationship, who knows what's possible if you keep your eyes open. 6. I often find it difficult to shop for a gift for a friend. Maximizer find it difficult because somewhere out there is the perfect gift. 7. Renting videos is really difficult. I am always struggling to pick the best one. There are thousands of possibilities in the video store. There must be one that's just right for my current mood and the people I'll be watching with. I'll just pick out the best of the current releases and then scour the rest of the store to see if there's a classic that would be even better. When shopping, I have a hard time finding clothing that I really love. The only way a maximizer can really love a clothing item is by knowing that there isn't a better alternative out there somewhere. I am a big fan of lists that attempt to rank things: the best movies, the best singers, the best athletes, the best novels, etc. People concerned with finding the best will be much more interested in ranking things that people happy with good enough. If you read the novel or saw the movie High Fidelity, you've seen how this tendency can get wildly out of hand. 10. I find that writing is very difficult, even if it's just writing a letter to a friend, because it's so hard to word things just right. I often do several drafts of even simple things. Maximizers can edit themselves into writer's block. No matter what I do, I have the highest standards for myself. Maximizers want everything they do to be just right, which can lead to unhealthy self criticism. I never settle for second best. Here, self editing and self criticism can lead to inertia. I often fantasize about living in ways that are quite different from my actual life. Maximizers spend more time than satisficers thinking about roads not traveled. Whole shelves of psychological self-help books testifying testify to the dangers of this shoulda woulda coulda thinking. In another study, we asked respondents several questions that would reveal their maximizing tendency in action. Not surprisingly, we found that maximizers engage in more product comparison than satisficers, both before and after they make purchasing decisions. Maximizers take longer than satisficers to decide on a purchase. Maximizers spend more time than satisficers comparing their purchasing decision to their decisions of others. Maximizers are more likely to experience regret after a purchase. Maximizers are more likely to spend time thinking about hypothetical alternatives to the purchases they've made. Maximizers generally feel less positive about their purchasing decision. And when the questions were broadened to include other experiences, we found something much more compelling. Maximizers savor positive events less than satisficers and do not cope as well, by their own admission, with negative events. After something bad happens to them, maximizers' sense of well being takes longer to recover. Maximizers tend to brood or ruminate more than satisficers. The price of maximizing. The problems created by being awash with choice should be much worse for maximizers than they are for satisficers. If you are a satisficer, the number of available options need not have a significant impact on your decision making. When you examine an object and it's good enough to meet your standards, you look no further. Thus, the countless other available choices become irrelevant. But if you are a maximizer, every option has the potential to snare you into endless tangles of anxiety, regret, and second guessing. Does it follow that maximizers are less happy than satisficers? We tested this idea by having the same people who filled out the maximization scale fill out a variety of other questionnaires that have been shown over the years to be reliable indicators of well being. One questionnaire measured happiness. A sample item from that questionnaire asked people to rate themselves on a scale that went from not a very happy person to a very happy person. Another questionnaire measured optimism. A sample item asked people how much they agreed that in uncertain times I usually expect the best. Another questionnaire was the satisfaction with life scale. A sample item asked people how much they agreed that the condition of my life are excellent. A final questionnaire measured depression and asked people how sad they felt, how much satisfaction they got out of various activities, how much interest they had in other people, and what they thought of their appearance, among other things. Our expectation was confirmed. People with high maximization scores experienced less satisfaction with life, were less happy, were less optimistic, and were more depressed than people with low maximization scores. In fact, people with extreme maximization scores, scores of 65 or more out of 91, had depression scores that placed them in the borderline clinical depression range. But I need to emphasize one important caveat. What these studies show is that being a maximizer is correlated with being unhappy. They do not show that being a maximizer causes unhappiness, because correlation does not necessarily indicate cause and effect. Nonetheless, I believe that being a maximizer does play a casual role in people's unhappiness, and I believe that learning how to satisfy is an important step not only in coping with a world of choice but in simply enjoying life. Maximizing and regret. Maximizers are much more susceptible than satisfiers to all forms of regret, especially that known as buyer's remorse. If you are a satisfier and you choose something that's good enough to meet your standards, you are less likely to care if something better is just around the corner. But if you are a maximizer, such as a discovery, such a discovery can be a source of real pain. If only I had gone to one more store. If only I had read consumer reports. If only I had listened to Jack's advice. You can generate if onlys indefinitely, and each one you generate will diminish the satisfaction you get from the choice you actually made. It's hard to get through life regretting every decision you make because it might not have been the best possible decision. And it's easy to see that if you experience regret on a regular basis, it will rob you of at least some of the satisfaction that your good decisions warrant. What is even worse is that you can actually experience regret in anticipation of making a decision. You imagine how you'll feel if you discover that there was a better option available, and that leap of imagination may be all it takes to plunge you into a mire of uncertainty, even misery, over every looming decision. I will have much more to say about regret in Chapter 7. But for now, let's take a look at another scale we developed in conjunction with our maximization scale to measure regret. To score yourself on this scale, just put a number from 1, disagree completely, to 7, agree completely, next to each question. Then subtract from 8 the number you put next to the first question and add the result to the other numbers. The higher your score, the more susceptible you are to regret. Our findings with the regret scale have been dramatic. Almost everyone who scores high on the maximization scale also scores high on the regret scale. Regret scale. Question 1. Once I make a decision, I don't look back. Whenever I make a choice, I'm curious about what would have happened if I had chosen differently. 3. If I make a choice and it turns out well, I still feel like something of a failure if I find out that another choice would have turned out better. Whenever I make a choice, I try to get information about how the other alternatives turned out. When I think about how I'm doing in life, I often assess opportunities I have passed up. Maximizing and the quality of decisions. Our studies show that maximizers pay a significant price in terms of personal well-being, but does their quest for perfection lead at least to better decisions? Since maximizers have higher standards than satisfiers, one will think that they end up with better things. The best apartment is better than a good enough apartment. The best job is better than the good enough job. And the best romantic partner is better than the good enough romantic partner. How could it be otherwise? The answer is complicated. Whereas maximizers might do better objectively than satisfiers, they tend to do worse subjectively. Imagine a maximizer who succeeds in buying a sweater after an extensive search. A better sweater than any but the luckiest satisfier would end up with. How does he feel about the sweater? Is he frustrated at how much time and work went into buying it? Is he imagining and examining alternatives that might be better? Is he asking himself whether friends of his might have gotten better deals? Is he scrutinizing every person he passes in the street to see if they are wearing sweaters that look finer? The maximizer might be plagued by any or all of these doubts and concerns, while the satisfier marches on in warmth and comfort. So we have to ask ourselves what counts when we assess the quality of our decision. Is it objective results or subjective experiences? What matters to us most of the time, I think, is how we feel about the decisions we make. When economists theorize about how consumers operate in the market, they assume that people seek to maximize their preferences or their satisfaction. What becomes clear about satisfaction or preferences as they are experienced in real life is that they are subjective, not objective. Getting the best objective result may not be worth much if we feel disappointed with it anyway. But while this subjective satisfaction scale may work for trivial decisions, when it comes to important life issues, education, for instance, isn't objective quality all that matters? No, I don't think so. I have interacted with college students for many years as a professor, and in my experience, students who think they are in the right place get far more out of a particular school than students who don't. Conviction that they have found a good fit makes students more confident, more open to experience, and more attentive to opportunities. So while objective experience clearly matters, subjective experience has a great deal to do with the quality of that objective experience, which is not to say that students who are satisfied with bad colleges will get a good education, or that patients who are satisfied with incompetent doctors will not suffer in the end. But remember, I'm not saying that satisfiers do not have standards. Satisfiers may have very high standards. It's just that they allow themselves to be satisfied once experiences meet those standards. Following Herbert Simon's reasoning, some might argue that my description of maximizers is actually a description of people who don't truly understand what it means to maximize. A real maximizer would figure in the cost in time and money and stress of gathering and assessing information. An exhaustive search of the possibilities, which entails enormous information costs, is not the way to maximize one's investment. The true maximizer would determine just how much information seeking was the amount needed to lead to a very good decision. The maximizer would figure out when information seeking had reached the point of diminishing returns, and at that point the maximizer would stop the search and choose the best option. But maximizing is not a measure of efficiency, it is a state of mind. If your goal is to get the best, then you will not be comfortable with compromises dictated by the constraints imposed by reality. You will not experience the kind of satisfaction with your choices that satisfies us will. In every area of life, you will always be open to the possibility that you might find something better if you just keep looking. Maximizing and perfectionism. When we go beyond consumption and into the realms of performance, it's important to distinguish between what we mean by maximizers and what describes perfectionists. We have given some of the respondents who filled out our maximization scale, a scale to measure perfectionism, and we have found that while responses on the two scales are correlated, maximizing and perfectionism are not interchangeable. A perfectionist is not satisfied doing a good enough job if he or she can do a better. A musician keeps practicing and practicing a piece even after she has reached a level of performance that virtually everyone in the audience will regard as flawless. A top student keeps revising a paper long past the point where it is good enough to get an A. Tiger Woods works tirelessly on his game long after he has attained excellence that no one had previously thought possible. When it comes to achievement, being a perfectionist has clear advantages. Thus, perfectionists, like maximizers, seek to achieve the best, But I think there is an important difference between them. While maximizers and perfectionists both have very high standards, I think that perfectionists have very high standards that they don't expect to meet, whereas maximizers have very high standards that they do expect to meet, which may explain why we found that those who score high on perfectionism, unlike maximizers, are not depressed, regretful, or unhappy. Perfectionists may not be as happy with the result of their actions as they should be, but they seem to be happier with the results of their actions than the maximizers are with the results of theirs. When do maximizers maximize? I am not a maximizer. When I answered the questionnaire on maximizing, I scored less than 20. I hate to shop, and when I have to, I can't wait to get it over with. I stick to the brands I know and do my best to ignore new choices on the market. I pay scant attention to my investment. I don't worry about whether I'm getting the best rates from my long distance company. I stick to all versions of computer software for as long as I can. And in my work, while I do adhere to very high standards, I don't expect to attain perfection. When I think a paper I'm writing or a class I'm preparing is good enough, I go on to something else. Perhaps if I spend some more time looking for better deals, I'd have more money. If I spend more time on my work, perhaps I'd do a better I'd be a better teacher, but I accept these losses. Nonetheless, like practically everyone else, I have my own select areas in which I tend to maximize. When I go into one of those fancy stores that sell elegantly prepared takeout foods, or to a social gathering that offers a buffet that looks like it was prepared for gourmet magazine, I look at the wide variety of delicious foods and I want them all. I can imagine what they all taste like, and I want to experience each one. So I find myself reluctant to make a decision. As a maximizer in this regard, I experience many of the problems I've been talking about in this chapter. When I finally make a choice, I think about the items I've passed up. I second guess myself, and I often regret my decision, not because it turns out badly, but because I suspect that a different decision might have turned out better. In restaurants, I have difficulty ordering, and then I look at a food being brought out to other diners and not infrequently conclude that they ordered more wisely than I did, all of which clearly diminishes the satisfaction I get from the choices I actually make. You may not be a picky eater, but you may spend months looking for a right stereo system. You may not care about clothes, but you will put your heart and soul into buying the best possible car you can afford. There are people who care desperately about maximizing their returns on investment, even if they don't want to spend their money on anything in particular. The truth is that maximizing and satisfying orientations tend to be domain specific. Nobody is a maximizer in every decision, and probably everybody is in some. Perhaps what distinguishes maximizers from satisficers is the range and number of decisions in which an individual operates as one or the other. This is good news because what it means is that most of us have the capacity to be satisfied. The task then for someone who feels overwhelmed by choice or choices is to apply the satisfying strategy more often, letting go of the expectation that the best is attainable. Maximizing and the choice problem. For a maximizer, the overload of choices discussed in chapters 1 and 2 is a nightmare, but for a satisfier, it does not have to be such a burden. In fact, the more options there are, the more likely it is that the satisfier will find one that meets his or her standards. Adding options doesn't necessarily add much work for the satisfier because the satisfier feels no compulsion to check out all the possibilities before deciding. A friend of mine has two daughters who provide a case in point. When the older girl entered adolescence, my friend and his wife experienced the usual parent versus adolescent struggles for control. Often the battles with their daughter were about buying clothes. Their daughter was style conscious and had expensive taste, and her ideas about what she absolutely needed differed from her parents. Then my friend and his wife had an idea. They negotiated a clothing allowance with their daughter, allocating funds for a reasonable number of reasonably priced items in their various categories of clothes. They gave her a lump sum, and she could then decide for herself how to spend it. It worked like a charm. Arguments about clothing stopped, and my friends were able to spend the rest of their daughter's adolescence fighting with her about more important things. The couple were so pleased with the results of their strategy that they did the same thing with their younger daughter. However, the two girls are very different people. The older one is a satisficer, while the younger one is a maximizer, at least with regard to clothing. What this meant was that the older girl could take her clothing allowance, buy things she liked, often on impulse, and never worry about alternatives that she was passing up. This was not so easy for the younger daughter. Each shopping trip was accompanied by anguish about whether purchasing this or that item was really the best thing to do with her money. Would she regret having purchased this item 2 months later when the seasons and styles changed? This was too much to ask of a 12-year-old. Giving her all this freedom was not doing her an unalloyed favor. I suspect that she isn't sorry that she had this freedom to make her own decision, but her clothing liberation provided her with much more worry and little joy. Why would anyone maximize? The drawbacks of maximizing are so profound and the benefits so tenuous that we may well ask why anyone would pursue such a strategy. The first explanation is that many maximizers may not be aware of this tendency in themselves. They might be aware that they have trouble making decisions and that they fear they will regret decisions and that they often derive little lasting satisfaction from the decisions they have made, but all with no conscious awareness of what is at the root of the problem. The second explanation is our concern with status. People have undoubtedly cared about status for as long as they have lived in groups, but status concern has taken on a new form in our time. In an era of global telecommunications and global awareness, only the best assures success in a competition against everybody else. With increased affluence, increased materialism, modern marketing techniques, and a stunning amount of choice thrown into the mix, it seems inevitable that concern for status would explode into a kind of arms race of exquisiteness. The only way to be the best is to have the best. There's another dimension to the modern concern for status, identified 30 years ago by economist Fred Hirsch. He wrote about goods that were inherently scarce or whose value depended in part on their scarcity. Parcels of land on the ocean cannot be increased. Spots in the entering class at Harvard cannot be expanded. Access to the very best medical facilities cannot be made more plentiful. Suburban housing can be made more plentiful, but only by putting houses closer together or building farther away from the city, thereby negating much that makes them desirable. Technological innovation may enable us to feed more and more people with an acre of land, but it won't enable us to provide more and more people with an acre of land near where they work to live on. Hirsch suggested that the more affluent a society becomes and the more basic materials needs are met, the more people care about goods that are inherently scarce. And if you are in competition for inherently scarce goods, good enough is never good enough. Only the best. Only maximization will do. So it is possible that some people are aware of the negative sides of being maximizers, but that they feel compelled by circumstances to be maximizers nonetheless. They might prefer a world in which there was less pressure on them to get and do the best, but that's not the world they inhabit. Does choice create maximizers? What I want to explore finally is whether the proliferation of choices might make someone a maximizer. My experience buying jeans suggests that this is a possibility. As I indicated earlier, prior to the bewildering shopping trip, I didn't care very much about which jeans I bought. I especially didn't care very much about subtleties of fit. Then I found out that there were several different varieties, each designed to produce a different fit available to me. Suddenly I cared. I hadn't been turned into a denim maximizer by the availability of options, but I had certainly been nudged in that direction. My standards for buying jeans had been altered forever. Throughout this chapter, I have been talking about maximizing and the number of options people face as if the two were independent of each other. The world offers a wide range of options, and something presently unknown creates maximizers, and then the two combine to make people unhappy with their decisions. But it is certainly possible that choice and maximizing are not independent of each other. It is possible that a wide array of options can turn people into maximizers. If this is true, then the proliferation of options not only makes people who are maximizers miserable, but it may also make people who are satisfiers into maximizer. At present, the potential casual role that the availability of choice has in making people into maximizers is pure speculation. If the speculation is correct, we ought to find that in cultures in which choice is less ubiquitous and extensive than it is in the US, there should be fewer maximizers. This would be important to know because it would suggest that a way to reduce maximizing tendencies is by reducing the options that people confront in various aspects of their lives. As we'll see in the next chapter, there is good reason to take this speculation seriously. Studies comparing the well-being of people living in different cultures have shown that substantial differences between cultures in the consumption opportunities they make available to people have very small effects on people's satisfactions with their lives.